I know what that's about. What's Blackie? You old your nose. Let me do that again. I know what's what, Blackie. You old your noise. You're old your noise. Well, we're off to a good start here, huh? This courtly quietus was delivered at this point because Blackie, even in her tipsy confusion, began to realize when she saw herself being stared at by several passers-by that Mrs. Robinson, in her ignorance of local customs, in his ignorance of local customs, had chosen a most unsuitable hour for their short time in this place of resort. After a most uncomfortable period of waiting, the door at last opened a little way, and there stood young Tusey in the narrow aperture. The old man let them in without a word, following his habitual manner, that is to say, using a sort of soft rapidity in opening the door only just wide enough for them to come in and closing it the very second they were inside. But once in the hallway, there was nothing to calm Red Robinson's nervousness but a small, battered bust of an expressionless human head, standing on a rickety table and bearing the word "Peel" upon its pedestal. Young Tusey became disconcertingly voluble. He began, in fact, explaining in a hurried, apologetic whisper that since it was Missis's party today, the rooms was all being cleaned and none was to be no, not if Lord P. his own self would to take one. Blackie stared at young Tusey in a bewildered daze, while Red, feeling as he looked at the bust of Peel that he would like to spit on it, experienced such a craving for a room that any room, large, small, cold, warm, carpeted, uncarpeted, seemed a disposition of Providence beyond all mortal hope. Had the half-tipsy Mrs. Morgan been interested in that delicate nerve region of the human mind where philology and psychology merged their margins, it would have been fascinating to hear for her to note the minute ways in which the North London bourgeoisie cockney of young Tusey, whose bringing up had been in the metropolis, differed from the East London proletariat cockney of Red Robinson. But in place of any such observations, all that the sad old young woman of 30 felt, as she listened to the prolonged whispering that now went on between these two men in the gloomy and dingy hallway, was a wave of infinite, unspeakable life-weariness. Morgan Nellie's mother, as her dark eyes turned from the bust of Peel to the patched trousers of young Tusey, felt indeed just then a very clear and very definite desire to be dead. When a woman was once safely dead, there would be no longer any need for bargainings about a room in which she might be legally and uninterruptedly subjected to decent usage. It's awfully bright, isn't it? Blackie had at this juncture, however, one great advantage. Had on its advantage one great advantage over both these gentlemen from London. She was Glastonbury born. Too drunk at first for it to occur to her to make use of this advantage, she suddenly began to feel, as she became simultaneously more sober and more disgusted, that nothing would induce her, nothing, to spend a short time in that house alone with Mr. Robinson. But how to escape? For it was becoming clear that young Tusey, softened by the transference of half a crown from the pocket of Red's holiday trousers to that of his own workhouse trousers, was yielding a little. An inspiration seized her. She turned boldly to young Tusey and demanded to be taken at once into the presence of his mistress. Red's eyes opened wide. Young Tusey's eyes, on the contrary, screwed themselves up into little points of confused amusement. He hesitated for a moment, looking from one to the other. "The gentleman must wait, then," he mumbled. "He must wait just where he is, till I bring you back." Mr. Robinson's imagination instantaneously pictured a warm, brightly lit bedroom, free from the intrusion of British statesmen, and blessed, so to speak, especially for his delectation, by the high priestess of lascivious delights. "I am wait with pleasure," he cried eagerly, thinking of himself. "She can't charge more than 5 shillings. You go with him, sweetheart," he said. "Honey, you don't be long." There was evidently an entrance from the one house to the other, for young Toosey now proceeded to escort the lady up the uncompromising flights of stairs, which loomed dismally in front of them. Red Robinson set himself to wait. He waited excitedly for 10 minutes, hopefully for 10 minutes, patiently for a quarter of an hour. Then he began to experience extreme dismay. He cautiously ascended the dismal stairs to the first landing. Here he found an uncurtained window, looking out across the slums of Glastonbury towards the eastern horizon. It was an extremely gloomy evening, but the background of the view, now angrily stared at by Mr. Robinson, was filled by the massive and noble uprising of St. John's Tower. And Red Robinson set himself to curse this tower. He cursed the men who made it, who prayed under it, who rang the bells. He cursed the imaginary god it rose up there, so massive and so square, to greet in those gloomy, menacing heavens. He cursed its rich architecture and the richer abbots who designed it. He cursed the buttresses, its crochets, its arches, its pinnacles, its finicles. Could the ghost of a medieval builder with a wicked eye for wild grotesques have stripped Mr. Robinson then and there of his cockney clothes, he would have found him in a state of furious phallic excitement. His frustrated enjoyment of Blackie ran and seethed and fermented through every vein. The image of his great enemy, Philip Crowe, mocked him from St. John's Tower. The feeling that found their human expression in the monosyllable 8 frothed and foamed like an acid poured out upon the stonework of St. John's Tower. St. John the Baptist, he thought. Oh, I hate him. I hate them all like hell. The peculiar mingling of his hate for Philip and his insatiable love for Philip's girl stiffened and tightened as he stood at that dingy window till they became a demonic entity. No gargoyle on any Gothic tower, certainly not on the tower he was gazing at, equaled in contorted malice, intertwisted with the fury of lust, the psychic demon concealed under the neat holiday clothes of Mr. Robinson. He felt as if the passion that filled him might at any moment rend his clothes, crack open his brittle body, and shoot forth over the roofs of paradise towards that hateful tower. Yeah. You know what that means. Yeah, you know what that means. He swept all Glastonbury, all his past, all his future, into the four-square erection that was thickening and darkening the air before him against the somber east. Gee whiz, this is getting graphic now. He imagined himself as the leader of a wild mob of men occupied in destroying with hammers and mallets every old building in the eightfold place. Then he would blot it out. He would plow up the ground where he had been, sprinkle it with ashes. He remembered with early lessons in his London board school that something of this kind used to be done to offensive cities. And this is what he would do. Raise it flat, plow up its earth, sprinkle it with ashes. Those old people knew a thing or two, they did. When he had reduced the place to a heap of plowed up earth, when he had sprinkled that earth with ashes from all the filthy buckets in his mother's alley, then he would enjoy Blackie in the best room of the Pilgrim's Inn. Then he would cry, "Yes, Blackie," and Blackie would cry, "I loves yer better than him, you handsome, hangry man." Mr. Robinson must have remained for at least 20 minutes at that window on the first landing of Mother Leg's next door. His imaginative orgy was interrupted by the voice of young Toosey from the hall below. "Mister, be here, mister. Where be ye, mister?" In his surprise at finding no man where he had left a very impatient man in the house of rooms for the delights of men, young Toosey forgot his manners, that is to say, he forgot his North London accent, and replaced it into his acquired Somerset share, the language of his long residence in Glastonbury. Danger, where d'ye be hiding then? This bain't a railway station. Red Robinson came hastily downstairs. Where was I? Oh, I lost my spot. These a woman be biding along with missus for thick party, mister, said young Toosey. Thus speaking, he moved to the door leading into the street and held it ajar, glancing furtively out to make sure there was no one in the next entrance. It became evident to Mr. Robinson that he was being politely but firmly ushered forth into a roomless world. Ain't she asked for me? Ain't I invited, you blimey old idiot? I was to tell ye, sir, said young Toosey with dignity and reserve, but with a glittering eye, that they ladies will send for ye when they do want ye. Thus speaking, he continued to hold the door open it just wide enough for the passage of a single gentleman whose shoulders were not very broad. Give me back that half-crown then, you old blighter, and don't you dare to snigger at people who been no harm. Or one of them ere days, some day I'll knock your grinning phiz into bloody beeswax. Mr. Robinson's anger was like water beginning to drip from a paper bag. It began with trickling drops. Give me back that half-a-crown. It went on with a squirting, thin jet of wrath. Snigger at people white no harm. And then the paper bag burst outright. And it also seems like we were talking about something else there, too. Young Toosey threw the door open wide. This was the only reprisal that he indulged in that was more of a retort than Mr. Robinson realized, for in all his experience as a Cyprian doorkeeper, young Toosey had only once before done this, and that was when he ushered out Mr. Wallop's father, that disreputable old haberdasher. Out with you, sir, said young Toosey laconically. Out with you. There was nothing else, indeed, that Mr. Robinson could do but go out. But as he went out, he gave the ex-inmate of Wells workhouse one glance of so much fury that the old man jerked himself backwards as if he had received a villainous blow. Red Robinson walked down the street without looking back. I'll make you pay for this. I'll make you pay for this, me fine bitch. But the unfortunate man had now to decide where he would get his tea and how he would spend his evening. He decided to go and see if Sally Jones was at home. Mrs. Jones, he knew, admired him. And there was a pallid pleasure in certain innocent liberties that Sally sometimes permitted. He had received that sort of affront that makes a person's own society for the next few hours extremely distasteful, and so he hurriedly directed his steps towards the Jones menage, much as a badly bitten tomcat returns sulkily to the familiar waistcoats of his habitual mouse hunting. I could say that again. But he found no one at home except Jakey Jones, who already had his tea, and was gravely studying his geography book in the kitchen table. What be an estuary, Red? Inquired Jackie after Robinson had waited there for an hour, hoping against hope for the return of the widow and her daughter. Estuary, the man repeated. Estuary, did you say? He went to the door, opened it, and looked out. Estuary, he announced to the empty alley. I ain't got no one. Mrs. Legge's hospitality was both large and varied. Titty Petherton, who was in considerable pain, but not so acute as to make it necessary that she would leave the assembly, sat in an armchair by the fire with one of Mrs. Legge's best rugs over her knees. Here she struggled to suppress her groans and enjoy this memorable occasion. I guess we should end it there. We're at 15 minutes or so. Well, that's Glastonbury for today. I'll see you again soon, I hope. Cheers.